Hey, welcome everyone to the Archicad User Monthly Webinar. My name is Eric Bobrow, and my special guests today, Tracy Stone, architect in Los Angeles, and Mackenzie Leifeste, your right-hand assistant. Shall we call you that, or is there a formal title?
She's formerly architect, and I guess that's the formal title.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so let us know that you can hear us and see. Well, we haven't started sharing the screen yet, but I just want to make sure we're getting through, that you can hear us and see our webcams, and tell us where you're calling in from. So use the questions area in GoToWebinar, and I'll just read off the first few. So Doug from Brooklyn, hey. Eric from South Africa, Gustavo. All right, Rick from Virginia. Okay, and Pam from Atlanta, Paul from Colorado. Okay, and now we're flooding in here, and Pierre from London. All right, and Paul Whitworth, you're in Los Angeles today, normally in Oregon. Okay, interesting. Yeah, Paul is also someone I've been working with, or had been working with, since late 90s, I think. When did you get started, Tracy, with Archicad?
Version 6.4, and I think that was 1999, possibly.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, yeah, I think. Yeah, I sort of have a 2002 was Archicad 8, and then 2000, 2000 might have been Archicad 7. So yeah, sort of like 99, somewhere in there.
Like
Great, and Imad from Algeria. All right, and Harry from New Hampshire. All right, so we got the 60 odd people joined. So welcome everybody. We're going to have a special presentation today. Tracy, as clear, has been using Archicad for a long time, and with Mackenzie's help has designed some interesting workflow for some of their more complex projects. We're going to be talking about the workflow and some of the tips and tricks that you've developed. I remember, what was it, 4 years ago, I had you on as a guest, and you shared this multi-unit project going up a hill, and I remember that was really quite interesting to see how you developed modules, and I know you're going to be showing us some related methods that you use routinely these days. I think that might have been fairly new, at that time. So you've refined it just a little bit here and there, but overall doing some things that are maybe counterintuitive or not immediately obvious, such as using negative stories for components of the project that are going to be repeated, or maintaining them in different physical relationships through the project structure. So let's just start out, Tracy, tell us a little bit about the firm, and a little bit about your journey with Archicad, and then we can switch into your slideshow. You are presenter, so you can go ahead and show your screen.
Okay. Is it showing?
Yep, it is.
Okay. So my firm is a little over 30 years old, and I'm located in Los Angeles. Over the years, I've worked on a variety of different building types, everything from commercial tenant improvements to a series of animal shelters and animal kennels, to lots of single family residential projects, and on to some multi-unit apartment complexes and things like that. So we've explored a broad range of building types with Archicad, and as I mentioned, I've been using it since 1999. So somewhat of an early adopter, I guess, and have taught Archicad over the years. But I will say that these days, I leave most of the Archicad use to my staff, and I spend all my time doing the administrative things that principals run into. So these days, I'm not as much of an Archicad whiz as some of the people in my office, including Mackenzie, who's here today. So just that's kind of a little bit about the firm, and I'm going to now go to Mackenzie and let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie, and as Tracy mentioned, I have been with her office and kind of run and manage the Archicad component on a lot of our jobs. I've been with the office for about almost 11 years, 10 and a half years, something like that. And I actually learned Archicad when I was in college because Tracy taught an Archicad class. So I've been using it probably since, on and off since 2009, 2008 sometime. And then I graduated and I became a licensed architect. I have some other certifications. And then actually last summer, I believe two summers ago, in 2020, I actually participated in Graphisoft's BIM manager program. And so I am now a certified BIM manager as well. So got to add that to the, to the credentials.
Good.
And we use those talents all the time.
So they taught you some useful things?
Yeah, I really just did it because I love to learn and I love to find new things and find ways to make things easier for us so that we're not spending so much time. So they really, went through a lot of the, when you're going to set up a template, focus on these things first, these things second, and how to really, manage that. But then it also goes into some of the higher level ideas about how you manage files, how you manage consultant things coming in. And while we don't really use consultants, or we don't have access to consultants that use BIM software, it's still really helpful to know because in the future, if we do, we will know how to set up our files. We will know how to set up our our BIM server. So anyway, I thought it was just really helpful information. So
good. So how many people on staff?
There's a total of 5 of us, including Tracy and myself.
Okay. And then how many projects do you typically have on the boards at any given time?
30, probably. 25 to 30, I would say, in different stages of the process. And then of those 30, as you'll see, some of them are multi-unit small lot subdivisions. So within those, there might be 6 to 17 different houses.
Okay. Well, yeah. Let's take a look. I know you've adapted this presentation from one that you presented at USC, where I guess Karen Kensick likes to give fair play to non-Autodesk products. So a lot of the architects are learning or using the other guys, the other Revit and things like that. But she invites Tracy as an articulate spokesperson for Archicad, which is great. So tell us a little bit about. Well, let's proceed.
Yeah. So in that particular class, she always asked me to talk about how we use BIM in an architectural office. So it's kind of an overview. I think our title is a little misleading. This isn't straightforward a workflow from beginning to end, but I've used 4 different projects to illustrate some different aspects of Archicad that we love and find very useful in our work. So we're going to bounce around a little bit. We're going to start off with 2 single-family remodel and addition projects, even though the second one, the Cordell residence, literally is everything was built new again. So it's essentially a new house. And then we're going to end up with 2 small lot subdivisions, and specifically with this Tahunga small lot subdivision, where we'll switch over to an actual model and take a look at how the file is structured and how we use Archicad to really master this challenging project type. And thank you, Eric. Yeah, we enjoyed presenting it in the past. And at that time, it took us a lot of stumbling to figure out this particular process or workflow, and it has just been a lifesaver for us. So we're very excited to review that again and kind of share with you the different things that we've learned about it and how we've really, I think, started to master that particular process.
Awesome.
So I'll start off here with this Sugarloaf residence, which is just existing ranch house, and our job was to actually add very little square footage, but to open the project up to these views and just kind of update all of the interior. And our client for this is a rocket scientist at JPL, and he's been a very interesting client because he, more than many of them, is really interested in the Archicad process and in the model. So one of the things that we find extremely useful is the sketch render option in Archicad, because it leaves things to the imagination, even though you have to model the project in some ways in order to understand or convey the concept. We don't want the clients to feel like things are too set too early. Of course, we always start off by modeling the existing house, so we have that as a reference, and then we can easily create these different options and present them to the client in a way that feels still early on, but gives all the benefit of the 3D modeling capabilities. In this particular house, one of the major design moves was to interrupt the gable roof with some new gables and to change eave lines to kind of get this movement in it. And that necessitated a lot of studying on how the new roof would interface with the existing framing. And we take a lot of advantage of the option to change the way you view different layers, so that we can create views like this where certain things are turned into wireframe and other things are left solid. So we can really focus on the important moments or the issues that we're looking at here. With graphic overrides, we can also change some of the colors of things. So in this particular instance, we've identified some beams in yellow that we were trying to coordinate. And the wireframe and the ability to isolate these certain areas is extremely helpful. As Mackenzie noted, we don't really have an opportunity to work at the single family level with our engineers who use BIM. So we generally end up modeling the structure in ourselves, down to the beams and the individual joists, so that we can make sure that we're not having any of the collisions or coordination issues that might arise. And it's also a way for us to understand what the engineer is proposing. But then it means that we can use the model like this in order to study some of these really critical connections or joints. And again, that moment, that ability to isolate the piece of the model is such a wonderful aspect of Archicad and is incredibly useful. I will say that we just recently realized that there is an option to select the things outside the marquee or inside the marquee. We've always used inside the marquee in the past, and we recently had a file that somehow got toggled to outside the marquee, which caused great consternation until Mackenzie was able to figure out what was going on. But nevertheless, I think that's fascinating, little aspect that I never realized existed. And I wanted to note how much we really appreciate the fact that using Archicad or a BIM software program means that you can use the schedule and list options to produce so much information. And in this particular case, this project is in a city that has a threshold for review that kicks in depending on how much of the roof you are demolishing. And so we were able to pull a roof schedule that was useful in convincing the city that we were under a certain threshold because of the amount of roof surface that was being replaced. So the ability to just grab that information from the model in different ways is incredibly helpful for us. And you know, as you all know, the model can be so incredibly helpful in convincing clients, both of the design intent, but also allowing them some confidence in what they are going to get. And so what you're looking at on the right is the original model and rendering that we provided to the client. And on the left is the house under construction. And you know, it's really amazing how how much confidence we can give and how much our clients, you know, as I'm sure you all know, really appreciate the 3D model. Although having said that, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question on the background of the rendering. So we can see some trees that are somewhat related to what the actual site is, although the angle is not the same. Or is that a photo from the site?
Actually, so the palm trees in the back are in the Archicad model because we had those on the survey. And there's something kind of funny in the, I don't know, can you see my cursor? But there's
Yes.
a tree behind the house. That's definitely an Archicad tree. But then we did Photoshop in a photo. So it's a blend here of different things.
Right, okay.
I was going to say that I don't know if any of you have run into this, but I have once had a client who couldn't understand the model either, which was really a challenge. And we ended up having to actually tape out everything on the floor for her. But I will say most clients really enjoy the model. The second house I was going to talk about is another, the one I mentioned is technically an addition remodel, but it's really entirely new. And on the right, you can see it's a single-story house. It had a kidney-shaped pool in the background, but our client wanted to enlarge it and raise the roof, the ceilings, and add some square footage to it. And she had this idea of a mid-century modern aesthetic, which was an interesting learning curve for us because to me, it meant something very akin to the post and beam houses from the 50s in Los Angeles. And to her, mid-century modernism was a little bit more the kind of Rococo revival that we saw in the 60s. So we've had a bit of a learning curve here on this one. So again, I was going to mention how much the sketch rendering tool is helpful for us. And on the left, of course, is what you can get out of the Archicad model. And sometimes this is a very early design option for the clients. And again, we don't want them focusing on the material choices, the color, or anything. We want them to just focus on the kind of aspects of the house that might have to do with this deck and how it interfaces with the pool and how the windows surround the fireplace and so on. And so being able to export it and then have fun with it if you want. On the right is a member of our firm. It really loves playing around with the renderings and trying different styles. So this was pretty playful with the little flamingo float in the pool. But nevertheless, it conveys a sense of early looseness that you can't get if you expose them to the model too quickly.
Mm-hmm. So when you exported it for your staff member to, you know, add in some touches, was this using the sketch renderer, like the line work, you know, the overshooting lines and things like that?
Yes, exactly. And then she added the kind of marker effect and the color and the background fill in Photoshop, I think.
I see.
The sketch renderings are also really useful then further on the design process, again, when you're starting to look at your material palette. And of course, the model on the left has materials assigned to it so that we can see them, but when you want to have a discussion with a client about different options, sometimes it's not so helpful to look at what's in the model because it begins to kind of get set in people's minds. So that ability to export the sketch render is really nice because then we can have a material discussion looking at the space, but without the prejudice of what we've just assigned to it in the model.
How big are those boards when you have them in front of the client? Are they paper size or are they, you know, bigger poster board?
That package with the design options was actually just a PDF 8.5 by 11s with, I think we had 3 or 4 options for each room with just general material suggestions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're playing this little animation, which is interesting because you're moving in space, but you're also changing the time of day. And maybe you can start it over again and just talk about what you're using as the rendering engine for this one.
Yeah, sure. Not quite sure if I can start it within it. This is exported to Twinmotion. So we used to use Artlantis for all our renderings and have been enjoying the Twinmotion plugin now and relationship. So this was created using that, and it was a way of looking at, yes, how this backyard would perhaps be used and feel at different times of the day, ending up with this little entertainment area over here.
Mm-hmm. Very clever. So there's a question from Paul Adams saying, is there a title page for the presentation? I don't see any firm contact info on any of the pages.
Yes, that's a very good point. We completely forgot to put that on there. So I can share that at the end, but our firm is tracystonearchitect.com. That's the website. www.tracy, T-R-A-C-Y, Stone, S-T-O-N-E, architect.com.
Okay. I did include a link to your website in the email that went out earlier today.
Yeah, bad marketing on our part. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, well, it's lovely. The Twinmotion, so you're finding that the Twinmotion works better than the Artlantis, which, you know, is not surprising because it is a much more interactive tool, and I think somewhat higher quality than Artlantis is able to achieve.
It's been a learning curve. You know, some of the stuff out of the box at Twinmotion, I think it took us a while, and it is taking us a while to kind of figure out how we want it to look. But we just got the new update that had, gosh, I haven't even opened Twinmotion myself, but it has a new sky dome, I believe is what it is, and some extra ray tracing items. And the renderings that we've been able to create in the last couple of weeks have been shockingly great. So the new updates to Twinmotion are huge, and it's, you know, Artlantis kind of got a bit clunky, frankly. It got really slow. So it was kind of time to phase out of that.
Right. Okay. Well, beautiful, beautiful work, both the design and, of course, that the rendering that you are showing there. So carry on.
Okay. So also really love the fact that you can, you know, convey information in so many different ways using Archicad. And this is the same project on the street side. Our client really wanted a sort of decorative block wall reminiscent of the kinds that you might find in Palm Springs, for those of you who have been to Palm Springs and seen some of the great mid-century modernism there. And we played around with lots and lots of different patterns, which in and of itself was a challenge in the software, and landed on this one, which appealed because of the simplicity of making a somewhat complex pattern using just two different blocks, a standard block and a projected face block. And by rotating the faces and creating openings where we could, we get a fair amount of complexity out of this system. But how to, number one, model it and then explain it to the contractor was a challenge. And we ended up building the blocks using the morph tool, and then placing each block painstakingly to build the wall, sort of as you would as a mason. And we were talking earlier to Eric, and I guess total missed opportunity here. Eric, maybe you can talk about it, but apparently the curtain wall tool could have done this for us.
Yeah, so let me just explain that just in general. The curtain wall tool in Archicad is one of several examples of system-based tools. The other ones that come to mind are the railing tool and the stair tool. In all of those, there is basically a pattern that's repeated and components that are defined within that pattern. And if you think about a standard curtain wall, you know, you have let's say opaque panels, and you have glazed panels, and you may have some door inserts and things, and then you have frames or divisions between those panels. Now, if you just generalize it, the frames can be invisible. They can even be gaps, or they can be, you know, grout lines, etc. And the panels don't have to be wall, you know, curtain wall. They can be blocks. You can define custom panels. You can basically model it with anything like the morph tool and install that as a custom curtain wall panel. One of the things that gets a little trickier to understand is that because when you are staggering blocks, as you would with masonry construction commonly, you need to have sort of a double rhythm. So if you think about a block, I don't know, what would be the length of one of these blocks, like 18 inches or something like that, or?
16.
8 by 16. Mm-hmm.
16, so 16 inches. So if your rhythm, let's say if you just had them stacked, you could have them the divisions of a curtain wall every 16 inches, but you want them staggered, so you actually create divisions every 8 inches, and then you merge essentially where each block is set, so that each block in general might straddle 2 of those cells. So you can set up then a pattern that repeats. And one of the really beautiful things is once you have the pattern, you literally just stretch the curtain wall and it just fills it up horizontally as well as, of course, vertically. And then if you want to cut openings in it or do some other modifications, you can override that. It is a powerful tool for exploring patterns and just laying them out without having to have a whole bunch of little pieces that are a little bit harder to manage.
Yeah, we should have reached out to you, Eric. It was a completely missed opportunity. This was fairly painstaking.
Well, next time. So
yeah, okay.
All right.
Also, really love the 3D document tool, and I know we all know that it's very difficult at times to capture all the different conditions in a particular building, and we have a contractor on this particular job who really loves the visual graphics, and he's open to all kinds of communication. So we had this particular one had a question about the corner of the living room here, and you see it in construction on the upper right, but that particular corner, the question was, how does the corner trim interface with the beam above? And so you can see our standard construction documents on the bottom right. There's an elevation, an east elevation, and there is a south elevation, but neither of them really provides a close enough understanding of how all of these things come together. So the 3D document is just wonderful at quickly grabbing areas and allowing us to focus on them and communicate better with dimensions and notes and things like that.
And just as a training note here, for those of you who haven't used 3D documents, you take a 3D view, anything like this angled perspective, of the corner. You then right-click an empty space and say create 3D document, or create document from 3D window. One of those it would be something like that. And then you now have something that's much like an elevation or a section, in that it is a view of the model that does get updated if you change the model in any way, but you can also then annotate. You can draw, of course, in this case, the simple thing is just to label things, to put notes. You can also put in some dimension, you can actually run dimensions even in this context. So very powerful part of Archicad that I know a lot of users aren't really taking advantage of, the 3D document. So
yeah, love it. All right, so I'm going to switch now to these small lot subdivisions, which is something that is I think somewhat unique to Los Angeles, but it's a local zoning ordinance that allows you to take any lot that is zoned for multifamily construction and to subdivide it into very small lots, as small as 800 square feet, and to build individual houses on them. And the houses can be sit as close as 4 inches, 6 inches apart, but have to be absolutely independent from foundation up to roof. And they share often a common driveway, and are otherwise have a property line in between them, and can be sold off independently as a house. And it's an interesting building typology. It provides a lot of challenges because, generally speaking, the footprints are quite small, but the houses go 3 and 4 stories tall, often with roof decks. And and trying to fit all of the structure and mechanical plumbing needs into these tight little boxes takes a lot of coordination. And they're also developer products. And so the developers never want to give up a single square foot, nor do they want to drop soffits if they can help it. They all want to maximize the headroom, and so there's all kinds of interesting coordination issues going on here. As with many developer projects, they also want to be very cost effective with their dollars, and so the more we can standardize the individual units, the better. And for us, if we can do a 6-unit project with floor plans for 2 houses, or 2.5 in this case, all the better, because we can limit the cost to the client of the architecture. But the question becomes then, how do you manage this repetition? And if you have only one model, how do you place it and deal with the fact that it's being used for 2, 3, 4, 5 different houses? So we generally start off with just a simple site plan using fills and line weight. This is just 2D work, very common, I'm sure, to everyone's process. Fairly quickly, we can start putting walls to it for unit plans, so that the client gets a sense of, for each of these layouts, what kind of unit is he going to be getting, or she going to be getting above. And the wall thicknesses are nice because already we're planning for that impact on the plan. Then quickly we go into the zones, and zones are really critical for this kind of project for us. They're so incredibly helpful in so many ways. So first of all, the ability to mass it out and quickly provide square footage to our clients, because again, that's what they care about. How big are these units going to be? How much floor area are they getting? And so we can give them this information really fast. And on the upper right is actually an image from another project, but it's kind of fun that you can also, code these with color, with some materiality. So we start to maybe get a sense of a design concept. In the one in the upper right, we were talking about extending volumes up to the roof in an interior of a warehouse conversion to creative offices, and we were going to put skylights up high, but the offices were low, and so how do we bring light down through what we thought could start to be lanterns in the space? And so really at this very early period, we can start to be looking at and communicating some of these design ideas.
Mm-hmm.
At the bottom right, oh sorry, go ahead.
Well, just finish what you're saying, because I want to talk a little bit about how zones can be visualized, because not everybody even knows that you can do that.
Okay, and I was going to say, our wish list is, it would be fantastic to see zones show up in sections, because when we are placing them on hillsides, we can see it in 3D massing here, but if you had a section where you could really fine tune the relationship to the slope, even at an early stage, it would be incredibly helpful. So we end up, for us, we often have to mix slabs and zones so we can see the relationship to grade.
Okay, well, I have good news, is I believe that the ability to see zones and sections was added into 25 in an update. I'm bringing up Archicad right now so I can actually, verify that where the setting is. Now, going back to the zone, so what we're seeing, in the bottom right, is a flat image of the site, although it's in perspective. So what are you using to create that? Is that just a slab or a zone, a mesh, or what?
Actually, what that is the grid line. We use the grid line to create our property lines and our setback lines, so we can see them in 3D. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mackenzie.
Yeah, that's correct. So you can decide whether you want to see them in 3 dimensions or not. But it also helps because then it shows up in our sections and elevations as well. So it's really nice to see exactly where they are. Gets a little tricky when they're not square, but generally speaking, it's an incredibly helpful tool instead of us having to approximate, oh, I think it's around here, so.
Right. So, yeah, a few comments. So just as a teacher, you know, for those of you watching this and having some technical questions. So the grid elements can be placed one at a time or using the grid, place a grid system command. Each grid element then has different controls, including its name. You know, is it A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 would be, you know, common ones. But also then an elevation in 3D, as well as an option for, in terms of the 3D for how it's visualized. So typically they're done as sort of little pipes with a certain diameter and a certain color, whether it's black or red or something else. You can turn those on and off in 3D just by layer. In other words, they're on a layer, and so you can turn them off. You can also just say, no, I don't want them in 3D, and then, you know, they just won't show up. Now, the zones that we're seeing there, the gray volumes, basically are what, you know, so I'd say there are Archicad users who never use zones. There are ones who use it just for 2D, and then there are the rare ones who use it for 3D as well. So when you place a zone, you can either say, fill out this area where, go find the borders of the room, you know, where the walls are, or you can manually draw a box or a polygon shape to do it. Whichever way you do it, it does create a stamp usually on the plan and can create a color to indicate, you know, usage. Then there is inherently a height for the zone that you can modify, and the ability to control its visualization. Is it going to be a translucent gray or blue or yellow or something else, whatever your choice is. Now, you normally don't see the zones in 3D when you just say bring up a 3D model, because there's a command under the view menu for filtering elements. It's called cut and filter elements in 3D. And that has a choice. Are you showing all types of elements, walls, slabs, roofs, etc.? Zones are typically turned off. But if you go in and turn them on in that cut and filter elements, or filter and cut elements, then you will see them. And so you can save views with that setting. So you can bring up a 3D view that has that, and then you can also bring up views that do not. So here we have a very simple visualization just of the masses, but you could easily have color codes to indicate this is circulation, this is office, this is, you know, storage, this is whatever usage might be. Now, one of the great things that you're doing here is you're getting reports with the you know, schedule of the zone areas, and so you can total up things based on you know, categories or individually. Just, you know, right now you have, it looks like 6 different units, and each one has zones for each story. So that's what you're, you know, totaling up there.
The nice thing too about zones, so we actually use them often as well for just our general floor area calcs once we get to plan check and permitting. And Los Angeles, at least, and, you know, many other cities, I'm sure, sometimes they give you a credit. So for example, for single family dwellings, you often get a 400 square foot credit for a garage, and anything in excess of that you have to count. So this right here, the schedule that we're showing, is a schematic, but as we get to plan check, we have a more complex one, and we can add, if you place a fill directly over a zone, and say we make the fill exactly 400 square feet, there's a way for the zone to exclude the fill where it overlaps. And so you can track credits that way, so that it says, you know, say the zone was originally 600 square feet, you put a 400 square foot fill on top of it, and so it will subtract the 400 square feet and say, I'm only going to count 200 total in your total square footage. So it's super smart. Anyway, if you can figure it out, we have it set up in our template over on the side, so that if people want to use it, you just drag it over and you just rearrange the elements so that they work. But it's super powerful tool.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to try to track down that thing about the showing fills in section. Because I haven't quite located it here, but I know I saw something about that recently in the last couple of months and went, all right, they finally did it.
That would be great. We wanted to check that it wasn't a new feature in 25 before we put it on the wish list, and so we looked yesterday and couldn't find it ourselves. So we'd love to know.
All right. Well, maybe someone who any of you out there who has discovered this or are using it, please post it as a comment, and that'll give us all a tip. All right, so carry on, then we can move forward.
All right. So these small lot projects are very controversial in Los Angeles, and they follow the state subdivision map act, which requires us to have a public hearing for any subdivision. And it, because of the public hearing, that requires us to do neighborhood outreach. And so we present these to a lot of neighbors, and we found it quite useful to model in the context and the surrounding buildings, even the surrounding trees. And this is just showing an instance where the neighbor behind this small lot project was very concerned about the privacy impacts to their backyard. And we had their house modeled in it, and they happen to have this whole forest of trees in the back. And so we had a meeting at their house where we took the BIMX model, and of which you see a view on the right, to show them what the view would be from their backyard. Or from the back of their house, and how the trees that were there really were going to, shield a lot of the backyard from this project. And there was a question also about whether the back unit could have a roof deck. And so what you're looking at on the left is a comparison of the roof deck that we were proposing at the top, which would set back some, I forget, 20 feet or so from the roof edge. The middle one is the roof deck that would be allowed by right if the project was built as an apartment rather than a small lot subdivision. And at the bottom is comparing the impact, or comparing the two views. And so it's just using the modeling capabilities and the ability to quickly put in your context to help, in some cases, sell or alleviate concerns. So now I want to get into a little bit of how we do this with modules. So what you're looking at here are the...
Before you go on, sorry, Tracy.
Yeah, sure.
I did quick web research. The option was added in to the most recent update of Archicad 25.4013. Actually, well, it's the update in November, so there might have been another one since then. It's under the project preferences under legacy. And there is a checkbox that says hide zones and their associated labels on section type views. It is checked by default so that it doesn't catch you by surprise. Oh my God, what am I seeing in my section? If you uncheck that, then you will be able to see the zones. Now, it would be based on layers. So of course you have to have the layer on, just like anything there. So this, and it says as in Archicad 24 and before. So this is in project options menu, project preferences, legacy, hide zones, you uncheck.
So thank you very much. I would never have stumbled on that myself. Very helpful.
Yeah.
And really great to know.
So maybe, Mackenzie, when you're bringing up the 3D model, you know, we can check that out.
Great. All right, so this particular project has 6 units and total, and there are 3 unique modules that repeat once each. They're mirrored. So you see on the upper right, we've got the original module, and then we place it as a mirrored module to the north. And each of these is modeled, but through a process which we'll run through in a little bit, it's quite easy to place them as many times as you want. And here you get a sense of unit A, B, and C across the bottom and how they are mirrored at the top. And the mirroring process brings the entire module with it, and you see what would be a section through the whole thing up on the right. Just again, going back to this idea of different ways to communicate information using the different aspects of Archicad, and love the fact that we can put together sheets now that include 3D views, 3D documents, actual typical details, elevations, all to get across the idea of, in this case, a screen system that would run alongside the stairs and feel continuous, but our client wanted it to feel continuous, but then you can see at the bottom right various conditions on the different floors mean that they can't actually continue entirely. So wanted to make sure everyone understood that. And as I mentioned, we almost always model in the structure. And in small up projects, we model in the ductwork and often the vent lines, the plumbing vent lines, to make sure that we can snake our way through the structure as needed. Here again, we've got the exterior walls and floors and everything turned to wireframe, those layers, and we're just looking at the framing. And we have used graphic overrides to indicate areas of conflict and or steel. So it can be a really incredibly useful process. Our developer clients love this. It's a real selling point for them that we can do this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie to go through this Tujunga small lot subdivision, which we also have the model open, and we can dive into a little bit more about the modules.
Yeah, so this Tujunga project.
Let me make you presenter here.
Okay, well, we're going to follow the PDF just a little bit longer, and then at the end, we'll switch over to the model.
Okay.
This is a very similar project concept-wise as the one Tracy just showed. This is a 8-unit building, and as you can see, there's kind of pairs. So there's 2 pairs in the front, and there's 2 pairs in the back. The 4 units at the front are all type A, and they're just mirrored, and then mirrored as a pair again. Same with the back. They're type B, and they're mirrored perfectly against each other, and then as a pair. So this is kind of the nitty gritty of how we actually set the models up. So we often have a site level, which is, stories 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however they end up being. And then we have found the most straightforward, easiest to manage process of managing these modules are actually creating them in what we call a slang, like the downstairs area. So these are negative stories. So any story below story level number 1. So for example, that middle unit that is in there may be on story -9 through -13. The one below could be -20 to 24. We often will do a buffer layer between so that they're nice and separated. But that is downstairs where we have all of the live elements, and that's where we do most of our documentation as well. There's a million ways to set up this process. Some people set them as separate files. Some keep them in the same file, but we have found this is the most effective. So one benefit of having in the same file is you can use trace reference to your benefit. So we actually draw them exactly below where one of the units would occur. And then that way we can show trace reference and see how the site, the upstairs, a saved view of upstairs actually works. And it helps you when you're editing or moving things slightly. You can have a good reference of what's going on around the building, and they are not so isolated downstairs. One little trick is sometimes in these projects, there are unique conditions that you may want a window in one place, but you may not want a window in that same place as it's mirrored somewhere else. So one way we have found to do this is downstairs, as you can see on the bottom drawing on the bottom left, we actually leave that wall area completely empty. There's nothing there. And then up at the site level, we draw a small wall and say we put a window in it or a door in it, and that becomes unique to the upstairs version. The only way this works is if you take your documentation upstairs at the site level, so on stories 1 through 4, because otherwise you're going to have a hole in your wall. But that is the easiest way we found to create unique conditions. And as you can see in the model on the right most highlighted wall has a door, the leftmost has a window, and that's because there's a walkway or I think a driveway in this instance that you don't want you don't want a sliding door going out there. So
okay.
Two ways of doing the documentation, as I mentioned. One is taking the drawings downstairs where all the live elements are, or upstairs where the modules is placed. The upstairs site level version, the modules acts as an object more or less. Once it's placed up there, it's not editable, but you kind of highlight it and you can see it as a unit. We have found in our experience that the site level is actually the most beneficial for us, because there are many site conditions that are happening that you want to catch in your documentation, whether it be a pad outside the door, or if you're going to have some site staircases or something like that. It's nicer to catch kind of the general context of what's going on. So that does require you to take the documentation upstairs, but we found that that is kind of the most beneficial for us.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of going back to the zones because we do like them, and we use them a lot in our projects. We use them, like I mentioned, for floor area calculations. And then what's nice about the modules is once you place them upstairs, you can name them. So we actually name them type A, type B, type C, however we name that unit type. And then you can sort the schedules to be sorted by type A. So in type A, there's window A01 through A14. Type B has a window B01 through B17, for example, and it makes it a lot more organized for the construction, so that they know that there's 15 windows in these type units and X number of units or windows in the other. But that goes for not only windows and doors, it goes for floor area calculations, so you can really divide up the information per the unit type.
So you're using the identifier of the module?
We use the master ID, and we sort our schedules as the heading line, and I'm happy to show you that in the file once I get that open in a sec. But we use the header as the sorting mechanism, and the other important thing is filtering the information. So we don't want 15 windows to show up, for example, if you have 15 units, but you can go and filter from, story 1 and up, or negative stories, and so we toggle between those as we're working. But the final schedules typically are, starting story 1 and up. That way it catches any unique site conditions, like that window or door that I was just mentioning.
Mm-hmm. So there was a question, I think this kind of answered. Paul asked, does each apartment get saved as a module and then inserted, mirrored, etc.?
No, we do it all. That's certainly one way to do it, and I know some people do it that way, but it's not necessary. It's an added step that just becomes obsolete in my opinion. You can place a module and directly reference your own file that you're working in, the exact same file, without having to save it as an outside item. So I can run through that again when we have the file open, but when you place it, you just find the exact same file you're in, and it just references and updates the exact same way. And it saves you from having to manage, 10 files instead of a single file that is always with you, no matter, when you're working remotely. That way you're not having to access so many files at once.
Yeah, we'll go into, you're going to demonstrate, and I'm going to clarify a few common questions when we do that. And this is a key part of the innovations that you've made to the workflow that just save time, effort, and potential error. So.
Absolutely. Yep. In the image, you can see one thing that we often do for our projects. It's incredibly important to know the context. Where the roads are, what's the grade looking like, and especially for LA in these particular situations, there are power lines everywhere in Los Angeles, and there are a lot of important critical setbacks, for example. So we often always model in as best we can the power lines, power pole locations, and we actually have to produce a set of drawings to get an encroachment clearance to make sure that we're maintaining the proper distances from the wires. but by modeling them in, it makes it so that it actually shows up in our 2D documentation and actually helps us design around them. I'll show in the model that I actually build it often with like beams or some sort of fill or three-dimensional object. It could be a slab, I guess, so that you can actually see if it's cutting through, the top floor of your building, or, if your roof is overhanging into it, you can actually visually see that, oops, we're stuck in the clearance. We got to get out of there.
You mean, Mackenzie, you build the clearance required around the wire solid?
Yes, I built it in as like glass, for example, so you can see that it's glass, but it's not actually a solid material. So at this point, we'll probably switch over to the model unless, Tracy, there's anything else about this project you want to go over?
Let's go to the model.
Okay. Can you make me the presenter?
Yep, done. So I do see some comments from earlier. Just I'll quickly, in this transition time, 3D documents sound like it works like SketchUp Layout, which would be great. Maybe we could do a quick tutorial at the end. Maybe you can show how you create one of your 3D documents. Well, bring up one of them and then create a new one would be great. Dave Olaf says, it'd be great if we could incorporate, if Graphisoft would allow us to incorporate 2D elements or 2D imported surveys in 3D. He likes your drawings, I guess seeing the grid showing, the site context there. So we can talk a little bit about that. I think that there is a way that you can bring in a DWG and have it show line work in 3D. It's been a long time since I've done that, but I remember that you could actually have what appeared to be like a texture file, or like a visualization, but floating like paper in the space.
Nice.
Eric Lutz says 3D cutaway can show zones in section in older Archicad versions. So a 3D cutaway is basically when you're cutting things away, you're in a 3D model environment, and you can show zones by turning them on. And maybe you can show us how you can turn zones on and off in this context there. And then Yvonne says, are you willing to share your sketch render settings? They're beautiful. Okay, so we have a few things we just want to fit into what you're doing here, including, do you have a 3D document? Maybe just take care of that right now. Do you have a 3D document in this file that you can?
I don't have a 3D document, but I'm happy to make one quickly just so people can see the settings. So yeah, so this is, you can see my screen, I assume, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right now, this is the front perspective, and like I said, this is all modules up here. So we're up at the site, and for example, if I click one, you can see this is one module. So we build them and place them per story. I know someone was asking if it's helpful to move them in outside files. The benefit of doing them in outside files is actually that you can do it as multiple stories, and so you could potentially save this as an entire house and then place it as an entire house. But unfortunately, that is the one downside of doing it in the same file. You can only do one story at a time. Otherwise, you're making massive things. So yeah, like you can see each of these, they act as objects and get placed independently. So very quickly, if you're wanting to make a 3D document, say I wanted a 3D document of this perspective to share with a contractor. We didn't actually make any for this particular project, but under your project map, there is a tab, I guess. And if you right click on it, you could make a new 3D document from 3D, and that will save the 3D settings from this. You'll have to name it. And then it will save it in here. And kind of like when you're
so by the way, you can also right-click
sections and elevation.
Sorry, you can also right-click an empty space in the view and have a similar command. So
Okay, great. Good to know.
So it looks like Mackenzie is frozen. Ah,
Am I back? It probably was, it was thinking, my computer. Okay, so this is pretty ugly to look at right now, but just know that there are so many settings. It's very similar to sections and elevations where you can adjust how hatches do or don't show up, or textures, color, pens, line weights, all of that kind of fun stuff can all be managed.
so yeah, go to model appearance and just put on at least the fills, colors.
So for example, you can change that.
That was a cut one though, Mackenzie. I think you need to do this surface.
It's generating. So then once you've got this set up, you can then annotate. You'll see on the left side that the document menu, or I'm sorry, the documenting tools are available, text, labels, even dimensions. And this is a live view, much like a section is. And so it will update if the building changes. Now, it doesn't have the ability to have textures like, or photo rendering textures in it. It is more limited to the way we've had sections and elevations up till 24. We can now actually have sections and elevations with textures, but can't do it in the 3D document yet.
Okay.
So if you just want to put in one label just so that people can see.
Yeah, it's just like you would in a floor plan or section or elevation. So you can label it, you can make them associative still, because these are all live elements more or less. And if you change them in 3D document, it does change them in 2D. So beware, this is not 2D. This is, if you change the height of the wall, it will change it in everything else.
Can you show it dimension too? That's a little interesting.
So for example, these buildings are 21 feet and 3 inches. So yeah, it can do all of the same documentation type stuff. And it's a little funky how it works in 3 dimensions because it wants to align parallel to something, but you just got to get it on the right axis or the right plane and take it from there.
All right. So that answers that question of how do you create them?
Sure.
And we had, what was it? Showing the zone in the 3D window.
Oh, sure. I did find that while you were talking. So yeah, Eric was saying it's under options, project preferences, and legacy.
Well, let's start. I'm sorry to sort of commandeer this, but I just want to start with a 3D view. So go back to the normal 3D window, not the 3D document.
Okay.
And then go to the view menu and the, I think 3D elements in 3D view, and then filter and cut.
Yes, this is actually key for the way we work as well. So as this 3D view that you're looking at, right now we have it filtered so that you're only looking at story 1 through 5. Mm-hmm. But we also save views for each of our modules. So we have saved views for module A, which is downstairs, and it's only showing negative story 16 through 11, and that way you can isolate your live components downstairs without having all the mess and this, giant, birthday cake thing where it's hard to maneuver in 3 dimensions. So
yeah, just show your story structure there. Just hold that down for a minute. All right, so you've got then 3 different unit types down below with a buffer story in between each one. And yeah. So that's how you were organizing it. If you had more units, you just add more stories. Archicad doesn't have a particular limit on how many stories.
Oh gosh, no. And we have projects that have 5, 6, 7 unit types. So it just keeps going, which is fantastic. This
And
particular
you
project doesn't have a type
specify-
C.
You specify height from one story to another the same way as you usually would. The buffer story is arbitrary or you know, up to you, and you could make that, you know, a foot, you could make that 20 feet. You know, it's just a spacer. So
Right, absolutely. And I mean, like I was saying, the type C we don't have a type C in this particular project. The reason it's here is we actually have this story structure built into our template. It saves a lot of time from having to model or you know, locate and size all these stories later. So we put in at least three module types because it's such a common project type for us into our template that saves a lot of time.
mm-hmm.
So,
And we often will start from the very beginning using the modules when we know it's going to be a repetitive one. As soon as we have set up in 2D kind of an idea of how the site's going to lay out and what the how many different units we're going to have, we'll go directly into modeling them down on the lower level so that we can place them more than once and see exactly how they're going to work together.
Okay, so you want to turn on the zone by checking it. We'll then see the zones appear in this 3D view, which may or may not be prominent, but we'll see.
you'll see 'em. Oh, so that's what happens when you change the filter and cut elements in 3D. The particular view, I had changed the stories and it's no longer visible. So that's exactly what happened there. So I'm going to move it back up to the side. And let me see, just double check that filter and color cut elements zones stayed on. Oh, but our zones, we keep our zones on a layer that gets turned on and off. So let me turn that one on real quick.
And then after you do that, I want you to just show the zones only. So we can see that they overlap here, but then if you just go into the show, turn off all other element types.
I do not have that toolbar out. Which one is it?
Just under the view menu, the same command you were just in, the filter and cut.
Oh, okay.
Just filter off the other things.
There is also, just so people know, that there's a little toolbar that lets you toggle layers on and off like that. But we don't use that.
Yeah, so you must have left walls on because they were, you know, so.
Yep, I must have on accident.
Yeah. All right, so now you can see that the zones can be shown, and if you were just to float around, you know, like orbit in space, you know, we would see this is the volumetric view of the project with some actual walls, but no doors and windows. You notice how those are just being cutouts because she turned off doors and windows, and you could just turn off all the walls as well. All right, so that was something to show. Then just take a section and let's just show the setting for what happens before you change that legacy setting, and then what happens when you do change that legacy setting. Because I looked at it in a sample project and realized, oh, we got to be careful with that. All right, so we're.
One second. This is actually a saved view, so let me just double check that didn't get. You know, we have the view saved with them off.
No, if you just open one of your saved views, which it looks like you have, and then you go to the legacy. So just zoom in on an area just so we can see where, let's say in the central part of this, just zoom in on it. Yeah, okay, good. Now go to the options menu, project preferences, legacy. And we'll uncheck hide zones. Now, if the zone layer is on, you may see that everything sort of changes because the zone blocks it out.
Yep, there it is. So I just selected it. You can see that this is the zone. It's our type D second floor zone.
Now, there's two things. If you want to be able to select it but still see through it, then you want to change the visibility or the model appearance. So zones can have different colors or appearance in 3D. So if you, with the zone selected, scroll down to the bottom of your info box. and you have your glass blue, change it to glass clear, for example.
Okay, sorry, 1 second. This is, these are modules, so
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to change it. I just have to go downstairs. So here we are downstairs. This is still our zone, and I can change this material. We do have an air space.
Now you're not going to see it immediately because you probably don't have transparency set up in those sections. So if you right click and say section settings, and then you turn on transparency at yeah, turn that on.
Actually, we want to cut, right?
Well, it's just transparency. It's seeing through that.
Okay. Oh, there it goes. You can see now the stair occurring beyond.
Yeah, so we're not seeing the other ones because the zones are not considered transparent at the moment.
So I just changed the second floor one to airspace as well. Air material.
Okay, so the transparency, I'm not quite sure why it would block that out, but this is clearly one of the complications that Graphisoft said, you know what, if we turn this on saying, hey, there's a new feature, you know, people might go, what happened to my sections, right?
Yeah, I just realized we stack a lot of zones on top for different floor area calculations. So I just had to make sure both were shown as the air, but now you can see them.
All right, so why would you show something if you want to see through it immediately? Because you can label zones. You can actually have the zone, a label saying what the name of the room is. You can have some other attributes that you can display because it now is an element that's accessible in the model.
Yeah, that would be an incredibly helpful tool because we just label things with text now in section, you know, the room or the story. So being able to do it automatically would be fantastic.
You can pull information. You could pull the area of the zone, the area from the plan, but show it in the section. If you wanted to say this is a big room, small room, whatever, you have elevations, you know, base elevation, height, top elevation of the zone, etc. So you'll have to use it selectively, but it makes it accessible. All right. So there's a question from Doug Muir saying, can you embed a module within a module, repeat a small multi-story project on a large site? And the answer is yes.
Absolutely, yes. And there's a little trick too. If you're designing around a unique condition, there's a thing called nested modules that you can choose to include or exclude when you're placing a module. So we have a trick on one of our other projects where we wanted to see it something, and it's a module, but we don't want it to actually be placed once we place the module. So we can uncheck the show nested modules and it doesn't place it, but you can still use it as reference wherever you build your items.
Okay. By the way, the question from David Yaguchi, also one of my longtime LA clients, can the zone stamps also show in section? I don't believe so. We're talking about, you can put labels in section, but I don't think you can say turn on the zone stamp. You're selecting it, the zone stamp does have settings, but it's only going to affect what you see on plan. You know, I may be incorrect about that, but I don't think they've added an option to say show the zone stamp. This would be roughly similar to the fact that windows and doors, you have dimension markers on plan, which are typically used to indicate, you know, this is window 13 or whatever. You can't see them in section or elevation for the window, but you can put a label that looks like a dimension marker and has the same information, but it's not considered a marker in the same way. So
yeah, I was just going to say that seems like a good way to manage it is using this marker or label as you do windows and doors.
Actually, select it one more time and just point out in the toolbox that the marker. No, if you can select the that one, so it looks like a door marker, but it is actually a label, and it's what's called door window label 20 in this case. But you can Why are you using the 20 library? Okay, all right. So it's a project that came from an earlier.
It's old. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So
Yeah, it's been migrated.
interesting. So you're in 25 because we saw the new feature that was just added, but but you're using an old project with the old library. So okay.
Yeah, but I will say, Eric, that that is a
Yes.
typical
Yes.
thing for us with these small lots because they tend to be very long projects. And so we have projects literally that are hanging around since 2015, 2016 that we are still working on, and they've been through many, many, many versions of Archicad. And some
Right.
of them we just stick at certain older versions because they're too complicated to bring forward.
There's a little random comment here. Handrails at stairs not required. Are you just not representing them?
But they're there. I see them. They aren't required.
So we're seeing
I'm sorry, I must have cut out. Did you
seeing the
can you repeat
railings.
that?
We're seeing the railings, but so the handrail would be the top of the railing.
Oh, yes, or I see what you're saying, or it could be on the other side.
Okay. Anyway, that was just a question from Tom Markunis. All right. So we've interrupted you, or I have anyway, a bunch with the questions as well as my, natural thing of saying, let me make sure people understand. Please do go on. I'm sure you had some other things that you are happy to share with us.
Yeah, well, we're happy to share. I think maybe just a couple of the things, if anybody ever uses the system, that is helpful to know. So by having them downstairs and making sure our sections and elevations extend to these negative stories, you can see that the live elements are built down here, and any corrections, like you can see that we're missing a footing, would be located down here somewhere. And then once we update the modules, that all gets updated up here.
Okay, can you show your hotlink module manager?
And so to update our modules, and maybe to just show you the hotlink module manager. So
and open it
it's
wider.
Referencing, I mean, I made a test file.
Yeah, can you open it wider so we can, yeah. All right.
So these are all the different stories that are being referenced and placed. To update, you just select the file that you want to update, click this, and it will update all of them. If you ever save a new file and say, maybe this file name is not the right one anymore, you've saved a new version, you can always just relink this file either from a local file or from the BIM cloud, which is what we use a lot.
So I'm gonna, sorry, interrupt one more time here to just try to make sure it's as clear as possible how hotlink modules typically are used. If you can bring that dialog back up, and what the variation is here. So a hotlink module is basically a reference in from another file into your working file. It's used for a lot of different purposes, and you could have a file, a project, a building A, a building B, and a building C as separate files, and you can link them into your working file, and you can even mirror them. Everything that Mackenzie has been showing can be done in that context where they're separate, literally just separate files. The big challenge with that is maintaining consistency between attributes. So if you add textures or surfaces, building, wall types, properties, anything that you do in the structure of the file, you would have to repeat in multiple files and make sure that they stay consistent. Archicad does a decent job if the name is the same. It doesn't have to be the same index number technically, but it can get to be a mess if you're over time things get out of sync. So one way of avoiding getting out of sync is do all your work in one file. So whatever you do when you add a new surface texture or something, it's in that file. By having these modules linked in this negative story area, basically it's, of course, having the same environment. Anything that has been created or defined, new layers or anything else would be seen in all the raw materials. The one limitation that we have here is that you can choose when you place a module to take one story or the whole project. And doing something like 4-story building and saying, we'll take this whole building and we'll put it in, and then we'll mirror it around, we'll do a whole bunch of them around this, big site. That, let's say, that would be somewhat easier if you could just say, give me all 4 stories or give me the entire file. In this case, you literally have to place each one of them story by story. Why? Because if you say you have a, see, cancel, let's do a placer module, just bring up the dialogue just so we can see that. So if we say place hot link.
Oops, one sec.
So when you say place hot link, you go select module, and you'll see that there are a bunch of them that exist. If you say new module, just from file, and just go pick any PLN there, and when you select it, it will ask, or one of its settings is, do you want all stories or a single story? Now, it turns out you can bring in this file, that's what you're doing here, one story at a time. You can't bring in the whole file again, because then you'd sort of be like a house of mirrors. You'd be repeating stuff. But so that's trying to give the context of why this works so well to resolve the issue of maintaining consistency of attributes, and why in this case it's really not a big deal just to put in each unit type story by story, because there's only, say, 4 stories in a unit. And then once you've got those in there, you can repeat them. You could grab them and say, this is mirrored or multiple copies, but you would literally have to, grab the 4 individual modules and create duplicates.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, sometimes if you're using modules as reference material only as you're building them, this is where you would say, I don't want that reference material. I only want the live components from that floor or that separate file. You can skip the nested modules right here. The other thing is, this one's right now named Unit 01, but this is often where we would say this is a type B module. And then this is the attribute that we're calling, or this naming convention that we call up in our schedules to give order to the doors, the windows, to sort the floor area calculations per type. The other thing that maybe I should mention is when this is in your own file, one of the things, Eric, that's perfect about all the attributes and managing materials and things that you may change in an outside file, inside, you have to make sure that when you're placing an inside module, that you want the elevations to stay what they were downstairs, for example. So say my story downstairs is 9 feet, but my site level is 15 for whatever reason. You want to make sure that you still grab the 9-foot height that you originally modeled at, if that makes sense.
Okay. By the way, you had some gaps in your internet connection, but I think we did get the essence of that. There is a question from Mike Cahill. If all the info is in one file, does it limit the number of operatives that can work on it? I'm assuming operative in this case means, Archicad operators. And the answer is that you can use Teamwork or BIM server or BIM cloud to work on it. Let's talk a little bit about how you're using that. I know, Mackenzie, you're working from home. And you have, and Tracy, during the pandemic, everybody was working separately, right? So do you use a BIM server in the office that people log into? Do they, are using BIM Cloud, Graphisoft sort of for rent service? Tell us about it.
So, let me jump in first. As you can see from the gaps in Mackenzie's internet, it quickly became apparent that everyone's internet was not identical. And we did have everything in a local BIM server here in the office. But we started having issues with everyone's traffic coming into the office and then back out again. And so we recently transitioned to the BIM cloud service. And now, Mackenzie, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us what that experience has been.
Okay, you're
so we went from a local.
Go ahead. We got it.
Sorry. We went from a local BIM server to using BIM Cloud as a service. That also alleviates our soon-to-be retiring IT, our IT guy from having to manage it. And it's incredibly helpful, honestly. It allows multiple people to be on the file at the same time. Right now, I'm able to log directly on the file on my local computer. Another way of doing it, which we were doing it for a while, was logging through remote desktop to our office computer and then accessing all the Archicad files. So you're almost doing double duty on the internet. So that's why we had some troubles before, but we've kind of ironed them out as we've worked along.
Okay, so let me just explain BIM Cloud and BIM Server on a high level. So we've had technology since Archicad 7, I think, for teamwork. Archicad for teamwork. Actually, it's before that. It was after 5. The version after 5, between 5 and 6, was called Archicad for teamwork. That version was very workable, but had some limitations around Archicad 12. I believe they introduced the BIM server and the Delta methodology. What Delta means is, as you know, Delta is the references the change between one thing and another. And so with the BIM server, it basically is able to send, when you make some changes or you work for an hour and then you say, send my changes into the central computer or the central server, it only sends in the changes, which are modest compared to the full project. Now that eventually became available through the internet as a cloud service, and Graphisoft has now made it, I think, available on a standard basis. If you want to set up a BIM server in the cloud, they do charge something. I don't know if it's like $50 a month or $70 a month per user, and maybe it's less if you pay for a year. So it is a cost, but a relatively modest cost for them to maintain the infrastructure, and for you to log in. Now you lose data control in the sense that your project is up in the cloud. Graphisoft manages it, but as long as you trust Graphisoft, and I think all of us do because we depend upon it for our livelihood, it is a very reasonable value. And I'm glad to hear that the transition, was easy and that it basically resolved some of the issues of latency and you have with your own service.
Yeah, and one other benefit of using their service is, we found that every time Archicad updated, to a new version, between our IT guy and myself, we had to figure out how to reinstall the new software on the BIM server, get that up to date, and get projects managed. Now it's on Graphisoft. They're taking care of it. They're making sure that we upload the file, it works, it's not our problem, and so it saves us that time of IT that we could be spending modeling or doing whatever. So
right. Okay, there's a question from Ken Brooks saying unit types are modeled in the lower stories until they're located to the site level. How do you change the story elevation values? So first of all, it's not until they are located, it's they were maintained in the lower stories, and then copies of them as hotlinked modules are then placed into the real project, in this case, 6 units you know, on a site. Now the elevations of things are, you know, based on the story. So if you select a wall, it'll say, I go from 0 on the home story, which is I'm placed on this story 2 or whatever, up to the next story. So they understand based on a home story of their new position, like you're dropping it into a particular location in the real physical model, let's say. And then if you have dimensions, like saying what's the floor level of this floor, you're annotating that in the section or on plan based on the instance that is in that place in the model. So it doesn't carry across the fact that it originally lived 50 feet down, you know, or whatever. Am I correct there?
Yeah, we can dimension everything downstairs, you know, with the live elements, and when you like in floor plan, and then when you place the module upstairs, it does bring the floor plan dimensions with it. They're fixed. They're object type. Like I said, these are access objects once they're on the site. But that also means that sometimes, and in particular this project, as you have projects that may not have the same finish floor, for example, they're not perfectly associated with your site level story levels. So for example, our first floor story level right here is at negative 2.8, and you know, we don't even pay attention to these frankly that much up at the site, because they're no longer applicable once we have the heights measured correctly downstairs, if that makes sense. So this slab, which I know this slab looks massive, but it's actually a matte slab because we're in a special grading area. This slab, for example, it's actually sitting at 1 foot 5 3/8. It really doesn't matter that much as long as you manage your graphic settings correctly. The slabs are no problem. Walls can be a little tricky knowing where your cut plane is, because the cut plane still will occur based on the site level settings. So if your cut plane is at 4 feet, it's 4 feet of this story, not 4 feet of where it occurs on the module. So that's just something to be mindful of making sure the cut plane gets set properly based on where your module actually sits in the site. One other thing we've come across is the fantastic new stair tool. And, you know, we really groaned about this for a very long time. We just could not figure out how to get the settings right, because if you're not going from exactly 0 at the first floor to 0 at the second floor, your stair doesn't want to show right, or, you know, it's really hard to finagle it. But the only thing I can say is the way we figured it out in the current day world is just understanding where the stair occurs upstairs and where the stair occurs in the view that you're trying to take. So for example, say this story, actually this module doesn't occur until halfway up, you're actually looking at the start of the stair as mid-level. So just making sure your settings reflect that. So you don't want to set your ground floor settings as the bottom half. You want to set the mid-level settings as the bottom half, if that makes sense. So just thinking of, I'm sorry, I know it's extremely complex, but it's a,
well, can you select one of the stairs, one of the,
these may be old stairs, these may be they are.
yeah,
But I'll show one, for example.
And we do have a few other questions I want to make sure we get time to at least briefly discuss.
Sure.
Dave Norman asks about residential unit modules and party walls. Are they overlapped? In this case, because of the whole definition of small lot subdivision, there is a gap between the buildings. So there are no party walls. But how do you, I'm assuming you have done some that are with party walls?
Yes, we did do one that had party walls, and I think we we made correct me if I'm wrong, Mackenzie, but I think that the interior units didn't carry the sidewalls and or every other one didn't have the wall, if that makes sense. In our case, we had identical interior units and then we had exterior units. And so the interior ones didn't have the walls and the exterior ones had the walls, or you can alternate them. Anyway, you just have to think kind of intelligently about which module will carry which party wall.
All right, so they weren't overlapped, Dave. They basically were organized so everyone had the right wall, but not the left or something similar.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah, or sometimes like that, we would use it, everyone would exclude the party wall, and then the party wall gets placed on the site completely independently, is another way of doing it.
So Phil asked, how do floor elevations work per unit if every unit is at different elevations due to terrain if the project is in one file? Now, this is something we're not seeing in this file because it's relatively flat or totally flat. But in the recording from 4 years ago, this was one of those big questions. It was a rather steep site, so that you had like 6 units or something like that, and it was at least 20 feet between, in elevation change from one to the other. So the ground floor of the one at one side was literally something like 20 feet or 2 stories above the ground floor of, at the other end of the building. And so we discussed that at length, during that recording.
That takes a lot of fine tuning to get the documentation to look right. It's very easy to model. You just place your models at different elevations, but to then get all of the documentation to show, if you wanted to get, we often do key plans where we'll try to show all of the first floors on one plan. But as Eric mentioned, the floors are at very different elevations. And I have to turn that over to Mackenzie to talk about.
In those instances, the best thing I can suggest is, showing walls as symbolic cuts or outline if they're low walls or things like that, so that you're kind of guaranteed success. The minute you say based on the floor plan, cut plane, or projected with overhead, you're relying on where it occurs upstairs, and that can get really tricky if you have a huge elevation change. The slabs work great because you can say show on home story 1 above or below. So those are pretty straightforward. It's the walls that get tricky. Sometimes windows and doors, like again, that one's another one that I think we'd probably just show as symbolic where we want it to show cut through.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mackenzie, when you are placing the first floor of the unit that, let's say, is closest, is the lowest one, you're placing it on the first floor, the first story. You're also placing the first floor module of the one that's up the hill on the first story.
Correct.
So even though I don't know if you can see my hands, even though in 3 dimensions, they're in very different places. As far as Archicad knows, they all inhabit the same story. Is that right?
Yeah, we usually set the kind of the site levels pretty darn close to one of them. And then in the other modules, as they're stepping up the hill or down the hill or whatever, you want to place them on the story that you want it to be shown on. So if first floor occurs 30 feet down or 30 feet up, they're still on the first floor. It just happens to be plus 30 feet.
Right.
In elevation.
And I know you just brought up the stair dialogue, but can you close that and just open up the wall settings and just so people understand where this symbolic thing is versus
yes. So these settings right here. So these two are both pretty important. If you have a huge grade change, if it's a matter of a couple feet, usually it's not a big deal. But this is where we would often show home story only. And we would show symbolic cuts so that it always looks like it's being cut through. Or if it's not being cut through, we would show outline only, so it's always outline.
So symbolic cut, basically the wall will look like a normal wall with doors and windows, regardless of whether it's floating in space or whatever. When you do the projected one, it's trying to say, oh, well, this is what you'd see at that projected cut plane height. So just to avoid issues, making it symbolic. And the only limitation with symbolic really that I found is that it makes it harder to do things like a clear story plan, where you have high windows that you want to show in a separate thing. So then a workaround might be to even separate out those windows to be an upper section of walls. So instead of being one wall with low windows and high windows, you have two walls stacked, and then you have, you know, essentially can use symbolic representation for both.
Yeah, that could certainly work.
Okay, all right, so getting back to the stair settings that you were saying. So here is a stair that is using the current generation of stair tools.
Right.
And
So the key here, so say this project, you know, maybe this finished floor actually occurred, you know, 4 feet up like I'm showing. This is when the issues start showing up with the stair tools. Even you have to understand where the stair is occurring. 2 options is either drawing it upstairs, so don't show the stair downstairs and only have it live upstairs, or if you're going to show it in the module, you have to understand where it's going to be cutting. So for example, that particular stair, it only understands relevant bottom story and relevant top story. So saying home story doesn't mean much anymore. So you just have to make sure that these settings get set correctly downstairs as you want them to show upstairs, if that makes sense. So relevant bottom story, you may not if it's downstairs, you may not want it to show like this, but you have to know where its future location is to have it set correctly.
okay, I think probably some people will understand that immediately, and others will, you know,
Yeah.
not follow it. But let's move on, because there are a few other questions that are very interesting. So question from Dave Iguchi about the floor framing for the bathrooms are different to accommodate what? So
Step down into the shower.
Because there's a shower that required some plumbing?
In this case, we wanted no shower dam. We wanted the shower to step down and slope down away from the floor, or at least actually our client really wanted that. So we had to have a shallower floor framing to allow for the slope to drain.
Okay, excellent. And are those actual beams? What are we seeing in there? The framing.
Yeah, joists and beams.
Okay, so you're modeling all of that as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see. There's a question about design variations. Let's see, where is it? Sketch render settings. That was one thing. You haven't brought up a sketch renderer in this file. Do you have that set up?
I don't know that we do in this particular one.
So okay.
Yeah.
Then.
So in all fairness, we actually had we made ourselves a book with standard settings that we really like. So we have a reference manual in our office.
Yeah. In some downtime, somebody went through and tested them all.
Right.
And printed ourselves a little guide, which granted was quite a few years ago now.
Right. Well, the sketch rendering settings haven't changed particularly over the years. One of the things that I did in Master Template in this past version was I created a layout sheet with a bunch of different sketch rendering outputs identified, and you know, so one can reference it. Any of you can do that, of course, in any project that you want to test them out. But at least, you know, it can get you in the right ballpark of saying, oh, well, I'd like to have this sort of lighter, more subtle look versus this one that's more dramatic. And I just remember that. Now, so you created a book. Is that so that like, did you just save it as a PDF or print out sheets or what?
We printed it and bound it, and it's in the office for reference.
Okay.
I actually don't know if it's a PDF as well. I haven't looked for it.
Okay, and so you're showing the results as well as the settings?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so
We
that,
took a simple project and the same view, and then just rendered it over and over and over again using different settings.
okay. Well, if you felt like being generous to the community beyond what you're already doing, I'd be happy to distribute that or make it available, as a PDF. If on the other hand, you feel it's part of your secret sauce that allows you to create things, then no problem.
I'll have to look and see. I'm sure we have it digitally. It's just been so many years, I don't know where, but if we have it, I'm happy to share it.
Okay, well, that would be.
We learn so much from everyone else on your show. I'm happy to share what little we have here.
All right, great. Great. All right, so Misato Denaka says, how do you typically handle multiple design options? Do you use renovation filters or do you copy items off to the side, etc.? So this is separate from what we're talking, the main thing for this.
Yes, this is Mackenzie and I are laughing because it's become kind of a funny thing in the office, but we tend to move them off to the side. And by the time we get done, we have a whole neighborhood. So we always talk about, no, it's the neighbor down the street a little bit more. Let's play with that one.
Okay, that house down there that has the porch, yes, right.
Yeah, and then you can just go grab them and move them, so anyway, we have done it other ways, but for some reason that seems to be the quickest method for us.
Yeah, it's certainly.
Yeah, for attribute reasons.
Yeah, it's certainly straightforward.
For materials and.
Right. Oh, which does bring up, I remember we had this question when you had the multi-unit one from a few years ago, that you wanted to have some different colors on the outside. Mm-hmm. And then the issue was that you could do a graphic override, but it would affect the entire wall. So if you wanted to make the third unit from the left red and the fourth one green or something like that, you could override based on things like the hotlinked module ID. Yes. And the layer, so the exterior walls on this layer, on this with this hotlink number, we'll make them red. But the problem was it would make them red on both outside and inside. It wasn't just the outside color. So what have you found that an elegant solution to that, or how do you work with it?
Mildly. We just did it not so long ago on another project where basically the owner wanted, or we looked at having a different color for every unit. So one way of doing it is saving a different building material or different composites for them, I believe is how we did it. And then we use the graphic override to call the specific composite on the specific unit, turn it green. Or it might have been the building material on the specific unit, turn it green, so that it was only the outside skin.
Well, you can't do that with a graphic override. You can't say anything this surface it changes to that surface. You can only do it on elements as far as I know.
Okay, I can't remember frankly, but we were able to do it by toggle or calling up the hotlink module ID. We named them independently, so unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're able to do it that way. So.
Okay, I'd be interested in seeing it because I know that you can say hotlink. So if you do a condition, so let's say presentation solid or one of those things there that, well, let's see, one that's a little bit more selective, or structural MEP would have specific things. So plumbing, so mechanical blue. Okay, so if you click on the rule at the top is going to be element type is all types, or it's beams, or it's walls, and it's going to affect the entire wall. When you say that you want to change the surface down below, you can see the paint teal. So this is making all, mechanical elements that teal. So you can say contains this.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if we pulled it up that way. We said building material is.
Well, it's still going to be the element as a whole, as far as I know.
Right.
Now, if you just cared about, hey, we want the exterior to visualize a certain way, then, you know, when you have exterior views, you have that graphic override on. When you have interior views, you don't, you know, you might be able to sort of just say, when I'm inside, I have different glasses on than when I'm outside, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm frankly, I'm not sure we.
Okay. Anyway,
Noticed what the inside looked like.
so the design options question was interesting. And I understand the option that Ms. Misato was mentioning of using renovation filters. So very, very briefly, when you're doing renovations and you're saying, hey, this is existing conditions or this is new, whatever, there are some options where you can say, here's a specific named filter, and I want to show the normal stuff plus some stuff only on this filter. So when I want to show scheme A, you know, it's going to be stuff that's designated showing only on the scheme A filter. And when I show scheme B, these elements show up. And so you can have different versions of the roof and walls, and they still are on their correct layers. But it's limited because it's basically only one scheme or one renovation filter can be active at any given time. So you can't have the front be scheme A and the kitchen be version 2. You know, you can't sort of juggle those two things particularly. But so that's one of the things that Archicad does not have a robust solution for. So moving things across in the neighborhood, you know, is another way to do that. All right.
The other way we do it is just layers, really dumb site option layers or site feasibility type stuff. So once we get past schematic design or that first feasibility, we actually start a new file and kind of purge the unused stuff typically, just to keep the file as light as possible. So that's probably why you're not seeing feasibility layer combinations. We're very organized in our office about how we organize views, layer combinations, and all of that. All
right, well, let's talk about this. This is fascinating here. And by the way, Eric Lutz points out about, you know, different plasters inside and outside with different surfaces. Yes. The one way that I think you can do this is you can actually do, you can override the surfaces by swapping and using Attribute Manager and saying, I have an exterior view, I'm going to change the definition of these surfaces. Oh, I have interior views, I'm going to change them back. So you basically have two states of the model that you could manage with basically redefining the attributes there. Okay, but here we have layers, and you have floor plan, a whole bunch of layer combinations for floor plan, enlarge, finished floor, ADA, etc., and a whole bunch of site plan ones. So what's the difference between, you know, the various site plan, easement, and enlarged, and you know, you have a gazillion site plans.
Yeah, different people, different departments want to know different things. So when we're exporting drawings for LAFD, they just want to know where the ladders are, where the front door is. They don't need to know, you know, there's an 8-foot shrub over in the corner, you know, whatever. So we toggle things with layers. This is actually a small version because this file is so clean in how it divides the unit types. But a typical project where there could be an A attached to a B attached to a C, we will often create, you know, floor plan type A, floor plan type B, floor plan type C, so that we can monitor or, you know, turn layers on and off. For example, the notes on type A may overlap type B. So you have to be able to shut those off when you're showing the type B floor plan. So easiest way we found to do it is with layer management. So.
Okay, and then you had the site options on the layers, not layer combinations. Okay, so site option 1, 2, 3, etc. So would these be then design options for how it would fit on the site?
Yeah, so these were probably our feasibility options early on. The layers may still exist. Actually, fun tip that I learned in the BIM manager is the problem with some of these site options, if you have walls on top of each other, sometimes they like to intersect, or they'll, overlap each other, and you'll have a hole through the building and think, what's going on? And it's actually elements from a layer that's turned off. You can set your layers priority to 0, and that means it actually won't even acknowledge that anything on a 0 priority exists at all. So that's something new we've adopted. We used to set everything to 25 so that it was a really low priority. But since, now that we have things, on like site options, we'll turn them to 0 when they're no longer necessary, or, you don't want them intersecting inappropriately.
Okay, so let me just clarify one misconception there, and then just make sure as many people as possible understand the power and importance of this. So when you normally draw walls and they touch each other, Archicad will clean up the intersection as best it can. When you turn off a layer of walls, like the interior walls you turn off and you still have the exterior walls showing, it will show gaps in the simple case where those interior walls would have intersected because it's still maintaining that space where they would touch. If you put them on a different priority, layer priority, you can see the numbers 25 and 1, then it will not connect. And in fact, you can use this when you're doing like a balcony or garden walls that butt into the exterior wall, or partition walls in a room that don't actually, tie in. They're low walls or something like that. So you put them on a different number, they will intersect with each other, but not with the ones that are on a different number. Now, there's no higher or lower doesn't mean more important or less important or stronger or weaker. It's not like building intersection priorities. So 25 is no different than 1. It's just a different number, right? Now, 0 is a special case. 0, they will not intersect with anything, even with each other, I believe. And so now the thing is that when you click on any layer combination or take a view with a layer combination, it restores the settings of whatever these numbers are, just like you would take for granted that whenever you activate a layer combination, some layers are turned off, some layers are turned on. So layer combinations include visibility, what's on, what's off. On the site, we don't want to necessarily see, furniture, whereas on the furniture plan, we don't want to see trees, perhaps things like that. So the numbers are a part of it. The lock, you can see the 4 different icons here. So the lock, the eyeball, the wireframe option, which is the third one, and then the number. So when you click on any one of those layer combinations on the left side, just click on any one, it instantly changes all of them to whatever was saved with that layer combination. So that's the way you maintain it, through views that reference layer combinations, or manually switching layer combinations when you want to have a different context. So that was hopefully relatively clear.
That's been a very long-standing confusion on our part. I always thought that those numbers were in some sort of a hierarchy.
Not in this case. It's a layer intersection group, and they're not. So let's see. Okay, set up story structure with each unit at a higher site. Instruct each unit on that story group. Okay. I'm not quite sure. Rich Matthews. So Rich Matthews, another veteran, has some great insights. Is set up story structure all floors with each unit at a higher site location at 10 meters, that would be 30 feet, or convenient height above, and construct each unit on that same story group. So I'm not sure what he's responding to, because we are doing it on a different story structure, clearly. So Rich, maybe you can clarify that. Oh, and then lower each story group of 3D items to the level that makes all ground levels at the same height. Okay. Okay, so I think, I'm not quite sure whether this is complements what you're doing or is an alternate thing. Okay, so Sherry Weaver says, how do you see everything outside the marquee instead of inside? So that was an interesting comment you made there. Let's just take a look at that.
Yeah, I found this on a recent file that I couldn't figure out why the things I wasn't showing. It's this setting right here. So filter and cut elements, which we've been in this box a lot today. Inside versus outside. So we figured out you could actually, you know, carve a hole in the model and then put your view in it, and you would be in the cutout. You would be in the opening.
Yeah.
So just bring up a normal 3D view, because we're in a sort of weird one with the, you know, all of the settings being odd. So just bring up one of your 3D saved. May have just restored when you did that. So,
there we go.
So if you just go to the floor plan and create a marquee of something, and then go and then switch the mode, and you'll see. So create a marquee that's like a middle part of it. You know, like a.
Be careful, you have the stair selected.
Yeah. Okay, so do you mean so like doing the opposite?
Well, no, take one piece, like, you know, like you were doing a detail of a bedroom or something like that. But take it so where it goes to the outside of the building. In other words, like extends.
Like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, so now I've rotated around where we're seeing the outside of it. Okay, so we're seeing part of the building, we're seeing the outside. Now just switch the mode of the marquee.
When we found this yesterday, I was trying to brainstorm why would you ever want to see this? But I can see maybe that this is useful to carve a hole. It never occurred to me to try to do this.
Yeah, so now it's cut out the area that was showing before. Now, the other alternative is that you can do a marquee that's not a rectangle. You know, there is an option for a polygon shape, and then you can create an L shape or, you know, any arbitrary outline, and, you know, have either it show inside or outside. But in this case, it's cutting a hole to expose, you know, the center part of the building.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Rich Matthews says that's to do with sloping sites. Yeah, I understand. So Rich, maybe we can have you back on for another go around. Rich has been on a couple of times. I don't know how many of you follow Saturday Night Live. My wife and I have gotten into it in the last, well, since the pandemic, I guess we've probably been doing a bunch. And they have some people who've hosted multiple times. And I guess the most that anyone's done maybe is 5 times. So they have a 5-time host club. So this is your second time being on Archicad User, and Rich has been on twice, I think. And well, maybe, you know, one of you will get an opportunity to be number 3.
I
Right.
think it's our third, Eric.
Yeah. Is it your third time?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, okay, there you go. You're probably yeah. So yeah, I'm wondering maybe Tim Ball probably also would be.
Oh.
We learned this module technique from the Masters of Archicad, somebody, and I don't know if it was Tim Ball, his name sounds very familiar, but
No,
there was somebody who did this.
Karoy Horvath. So
yes,
yes,
so
that's it.
Karoy, interesting name, Karoly, Karoy, like Caroly, but Karoy Horvath. He's based in Australia. I don't know his ethnic background. He might be Serbian or, you know, somewhere like that. But yeah, very clever guy. And so he was the one who, you know, as sort of a BIM manager type of role, said, you know, we deal with this issue with attributes getting messed up. And I figured out that we could actually reference it in from another story. He was doing it through Teamwork and thought that you could only do it through Teamwork. And then I did a little test and said, you know what? You can do it with a normal file, which brings up the final tech note here. So when you update your design of the module, so you're adding more information or revising it, etc., you're in this negative story. You may have, trace and reference to see, context, etc. So now you've made some updates, and you want it to update in the in the site area where the real buildings are. So what do you have to do? You have to save your project, just like you would just to keep everything secure. And then you can use Hotlink Manager to get the latest version of, you know, all the modules which are sitting down below. Because what it looks at, it doesn't look at your active project down below. It looks at the file on the disk, you know, that you've saved. So that's just a little side note that you, so it's really simple. You just say save, wait a few seconds, then say update hotlinks, and it will go and unfortunately has to open the file separately, but you know, relatively quick. All right. So Karoy Hungarian. Okay, Jacek points that out. All right, Dave Norman says excellent presentation, very clearly presented. So thank you, Tracy and Mackenzie. David says, when do you lock layers? So general, you know, very quick tech answer is lock them when you don't want to modify the elements. You typically might lock things like your property lines or your grid or your structure that you don't want to modify. Or when you're editing certain things, you might want to lock certain layers so that you can then move around other things without worrying about if they get changed.
Yeah, absolutely. We lock all of our site items.
I was gonna say.
So the upstairs, the grade, anything that's up at the side, that gets locked so that as you're working on your modules downstairs, you don't accidentally move something, adjust something. Because that has happened.
And as a tech note, you can lock layers and unlock layers, you know, just with the layer combination, but you can also lock individual elements, and not everybody knows that. So can you just select, I don't know if there's anything that's independent there, but I guess,
no.
Yeah, if you select, you know, what was,
This is an object to the address.
oh, okay, interesting. All right, select that object, just select it and go to the edit menu, and there's a
Number.
lock. Or is there a lock command here? No, I don't think so. It's under the edit menu and locking, and you can lock that so you can lock individual elements or a bunch of them. Now they stay locked until you unlock them. They aren't controlled by layers. And then there is an option to unlock all. Like you can say, hey, I've locked a bunch of stuff and I've got to unlock them. So under the edit menu, locking, and then unlock all will clear that up. All right. So those are some things. So Rick Pratt says, I see 3D text. How do you do that? Open up the settings.
It's an object.
It's an object. It's in the standard Archicad library. It's been there for forever, as far as I remember.
Keep in mind, this is an old library because this is an old file that's gotten migrated, but 3D text it's in all of them. And
you basically can choose the font and you can type in text, like the 4427 you can see is just text that's been typed in. Now, if you don't say, well, where is that? I don't, what folder, whatever, use your search bar, the little magnifying glass just above that, and just type in something like text or 3D, you know, whatever. So that'll find it pretty quick. All right. So lots of different thank yous, fantastic presentation, really enjoyed it and appreciate your work and organization. Thank you for making it available to us. Definitely. Paul Adams says the marquee option would be helpful to do a study of an existing space with a lot of walls. Yes. Okay. All right, so David Iguchi has a comment about when walls on different stories interfere with other elements, it is because of the wall setting showing on home story only versus all relevant stories. All relevant stories allows walls to show on stories other than home, which may become a nuisance. That actually, all relevant stories will only be effective on plan. It has nothing to do with 3D. And basically you have to have it go outside the reference level of the story. In other words, you can't say arbitrarily, I want it to show on multiple stories. It has to actually go up to the multiple stories, and it does cause some complications in terms of visibility. Use it selectively. Does managing by layer number eliminate this interference? No. Well, interference, yes. And in fact, in master template, I have a layer that I typically, it's general purpose, it's a wall special. So it has the word special. It can be used for any wall you want to not intersect with other walls because it's always maintained on a different priority group. But I particularly find it useful for foundation walls that come up and overlap in vertical space with the first floor or ground floor walls, because when they're complex profiles, they can get confused when they're trying to intersect with each other. And by putting them on this other layer, it makes sure that the foundation walls don't try to, modify or don't end up modifying the ground floor walls. So yes, that does solve that problem. All right. So yeah, lots of great content. Brian Fireman, for intersecting walls, I typically use the extend or split command instead of layer priority, which is best practice. So extend or split will actually change the length of the wall, either shorten it or lengthen it, or break it into two pieces. Layer priority or layer intersection group has to do with when two walls are touching each other or pass through each other. Should Archicad try to clean up their intersection or not? And of course, most of the time you do want them to clean up the intersection, but these are when it's looking odd on plan, then you should consider that. But extend or split will force, usually you're talking about getting the reference line of one to stop at the reference line of the other, or to reach the reference line of the other, and that's good practice in general. So let's say start with that, extend or split. If it solves the problem, great. And if you have this other thing where something that's on a hidden layer is making it look odd, then so you want to show us how this works.
Yeah, right now our so we do all exterior walls on a wall exterior, and then we have a layer for interior walls. So for example, if I were to change this to 2 so that they're not at the same priority group, is that the right terminology?
Yeah.
You're going to see that this intersection right here is going to change when it loads.
Yeah.
Yep. So now they're kind of independent elements that just happen to overlap, but they don't actually intersect.
So the wall hasn't changed length. The blue line is still hitting the reference line of the other one, but you can see that it's just not cleaning up at that corner. Zoom in on that corner. You can see and deselect it. So you can see what's going on. The drywall is not wrapping. Now put it back to the other way, and then you'll see that the interior wall will, yeah, you can see how it now wraps, because they know that they're on the same group, and it's going to say, oh, well, the framing should stop and the drywall should wrap, right? Okay, well, you've been very generous with your time, and I think everybody has enjoyed it. We had well over 100 people on this call, so captured people's attention, and we've still got 92 on the call, even though it's been 2.25 hours. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Our pleasure. Glad it was interest.
Yeah, so let me know if there's anything that came up that you say, hey, Eric, you mentioned something, if you want me to clarify anything. But I think you're doing great work design-wise, as well as managing your Archicad projects.
Thank you. Great. Thanks very much, Eric. We always appreciate you.
All right, thank you. All right, well, everybody, take care of yourself, stay safe. It's still challenging times out there, but stay healthy. I'm feeling particularly healthy because I've been getting exercise every day for the last 10 months since I had my heart attack, and I've lost over 15 pounds, so wow. I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
And,
well done.
Plan to be with you all for a long time to come. So
good.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy and Mackenzie.
Bye.